The clock on the courthouse wall reads 9:47 a.m. on March 15th. I'm sitting in the observation gallery, third row from the back, wearing the same navy blazer I bought 3 years ago with money I shouldn't have spent. In 12 minutes, my father will walk through those doors. He won't look at me. He hasn't looked at me directly since December 2008, the night she told him I was a thief. I know this because I've been watching him for 6 months. Every Tuesday and Thursday, same time, same coffee from the corner shop on 5th Street. He's aged since then. His hair is whiter now, his hands shake slightly when he holds the newspaper. I don't feel sorry for him, not yet. But first, let me tell you about the night I became someone he didn't know anymore. I was 18 years old, which sounds old enough to understand the world, until you realize the world is designed to keep 18-year-olds stupid about everything that matters. It was December 15th, 2008. A Monday. Snow had started falling that afternoon, big wet flakes that stuck to everything. I remember because I was supposed to go to Emma's apartment to study for my economics exam, and I almost canceled because the roads looked bad. Emma was my best friend since 6th grade. We had matching infinity bracelets and inside jokes about our chemistry teacher's toupee. She begged me to come over anyway, said her mom made hot chocolate, said we'd study for an hour, and then binge-watch old seasons of The Office. I didn't go. My mother, my real mother, had died in a car accident 4 years before that in 2004. She was driving home from the grocery store when a drunk driver ran a red light on Route 7. I was 14. It wasn't dramatic the way accidents are in movies. There was no explosion. She was just suddenly gone, and the world kept spinning like she was never there at all. My father fell apart in the way fathers do when their whole identity is tied to being a husband. For 2 years, he was a ghost moving through our house. Then he met Margaret at his company's holiday party in 2006. She was blonde, energetic, intelligent in that particular way that men find charming. She laughed at his jokes and asked him questions about himself and made him feel important again. They got married in the spring of 2007. I was 16. Here's the thing about step-parents that nobody tells you. They're a stranger who suddenly has authority over your life, and you're supposed to be grateful about it. Margaret tried, I think. She made effort in that calculated way that some people do when they want you to think they care. She'd ask about my school day at dinner. She'd suggest I invite friends over. But there's a difference between kindness and the appearance of kindness, and I was already smart enough at 16 to know which one Margaret was performing. By the time I was 18, Margaret had quietly made me into the problem in our house. It started small, tiny things. She'd mentioned that she noticed I was leaving dishes in the sink more often. She'd ask my father if he was worried about my grades. They were actually fine. I had a 3.8 average and had already been accepted to 3 colleges. But somehow her phrasing made him concerned anyway. She'd make comments about my friends, asking if Emma's family situation was stable, pointing out that maybe I was going out too much for someone who should be focused on academics. My father, who was still learning how to be happy again, believed her. Or more accurately, he wanted to believe her, because believing her meant he had a problem to solve, and solving problems made him feel useful. By December 2008, I'd internalized the message. I was becoming a difficult teenager, irresponsible, heading down a wrong path. Margaret had never said any of this directly. She was too smart for that. She just asked the right questions, made the right observations, waited for my father to reach his own conclusions. The afternoon of December 15th, I came home from school at 3:15 p.m. It was a Monday, which meant my father was still at work and wouldn't be home until around 6. Margaret was in the kitchen, sitting at the granite island with a cup of tea, reading something on her iPad. "Hey," I said, setting down my backpack. She looked up with that particular expression, the one that said she was about to do something generous while simultaneously making sure you knew you didn't deserve it. "Your father needs to discuss something with you," she said. "He'll be home early today, around 5. My stomach went tight. Even at 18, even thinking I was tough and independent, there's something ancient in us that fears parental confrontation. What about? I asked. He'll tell you, she said, turning back to her iPad. But I think it's important you take some time to think about your behavior lately. Really think about it. I didn't ask her what she meant. I already knew. This was the culmination of 6 months of tiny interventions, of her watering seeds of doubt in my father's mind until he was ready to have a talk with me. I went upstairs to my room and sat on my bed, trying to prepare myself for something I didn't understand. At 4:45 p.m., I heard his car in the driveway. He came upstairs without greeting me. He opened my bedroom door, not knocked, just opened it, and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. I remember he was still wearing his work coat. There was snow melting on his shoulders. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay," I said. He closed the door behind him and sat down on the edge of the bed, leaving distance between us. That distance felt important, like he'd already made a decision about me, and the space was meant to reflect that. "Margaret told me something today," he said. "Something she's been noticing for the past few weeks." I said nothing. "She mentioned that money has been going missing from the house," he continued. "From the envelope we keep in the office for household expenses. She's noticed it twice now, $40 the first time and $80 last week." I felt my body go cold, in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. "I didn't take any money," I said. "Margaret is very careful about these things," he said. His voice was doing something strange. It was trying to be reasonable, but underneath it was already disappointment. "She counts it every week. She wouldn't just make this up." "I didn't take any money," I said again. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. I could see the calculation happening in his eyes. He was trying to decide if his daughter was a liar, and I could watch the moment when he chose to believe she wasn't lying. "Why would she invent this?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but it wasn't me." The snow was coming down harder now, visible through my window, filling the world with white silence. "Your grades have been slipping," he said. "Margaret mentioned you've been going out more frequently, and now this." "My grades haven't slipped. I have a 3.8 average." "That's a generalization," he said, like I'd caught him in a technical error instead of proving myself innocent. "And you are spending a lot of time with Emma's family. I worry about the influence." The unfairness of it was so enormous I couldn't fit it into words. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I think you may be getting involved in something you shouldn't be. I think you may be asking for money or needing money for something, and I think Margaret has been trying to give you a chance to come clean about it." "That's insane," I said. "Your tone is inappropriate," he said, and I could see it then. The moment was already over. My defense was just proof of my guilt. My denial was just confirmation of what he'd decided to believe. "Am I grounded?" I asked. "I think you need to think about what kind of person you're becoming," he said, "and I think you need to apologize to Margaret." "For what? For something I didn't do." He stood up. "I don't want you going to Emma's anymore. No more unsupervised outings. And if this happens again, if Margaret reports any more money missing, we'll need to have a very different conversation." He left my room without waiting for a response. I heard him go downstairs, heard the murmur of his voice and Margaret's voice in the kitchen, heard her laughing about something. The sound of her laughter pulled my spine straight. I sat on my bed for maybe 20 minutes, feeling something inside me fundamentally shift. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was worse. It was the realization that I was living in a house with someone who had decided who I was, and now that decision was spreading like a stain into the opinions of the people I loved. Margaret had created a frame around me, and my father had climbed willingly into it. I went downstairs at 5:30 p.m. Margaret was setting the table for dinner. My father was in his office, probably reading the news or pretending to. She looked up when I entered the kitchen with an expression of such performed innocence that I almost laughed. "I want to tell you something," I said. "Of course," she said, with the tone of someone who had always been willing to listen. "I know you're lying about the money." Her face didn't change. That was the terrifying part. She had such control over her own expression that my accusation couldn't even make a ripple. "What a strange thing to say," she said. "You're gaslighting him. You're making him think I'm someone I'm not so that I'll be easier to control." "I'm not going to engage with accusations," she said, turning back to the table. "But I think it's interesting that instead of apologizing, you're attacking me. That tells me you have a lot of growing up to do." I stood there, watching her arrange napkins with surgical precision, and I understood something critical. She wasn't trying to convince me of anything. She'd already won. My father had already chosen her version of reality over mine. Anything I said now would just be proof of how much I needed to be controlled. I went back upstairs and did something I've never told anyone until now. I opened my laptop and I started documenting everything. Not for proof. I was too young and hurt to think strategically about proof. I was just collecting evidence the way a drowning person grabs at water. I started a hidden document file and wrote down dates, conversations, specific things she'd said that I now recognized as manipulation. I was trying to build a case against her, even though I had nowhere to take that case. Then I packed a duffel bag, not because I had a plan, not because I was running away in any meaningful sense, just because I couldn't be in that house anymore, breathing the same air as people who had decided I was untrustworthy, and I needed to feel like I had control over something. I left the house at 8:15 p.m., telling no one where I was going. The snow had picked up significantly. The forecast had been calling for 6-8 inches of accumulation, but it was coming down heavy and wet, the kind of snow that sticks to your coat and makes it hard to see more than a few feet ahead of you. I walked toward downtown without a destination in mind. I had my backpack with my wallet, about $340 in savings, and my duffel bag with 3 days' worth of clothes. I was wearing a coat, but not the right kind of coat, not a winter coat. A fall jacket with no thermal lining, a decision that would seem absurdly important by midnight. My phone buzzed. It was my father. "Where are you?" the text read. I didn't respond. The snow was accumulating on my shoulders and in my hair. The wind was picking up, coming off the mountains to the north with the particular bite that arrives in December when weather stops being something you notice and starts being something that matters. Another text from my father, 3 minutes later. "Margaret said you said something very accusatory to her. We need to talk about this. Come home." Come home? Like I'd done something wrong by leaving. Like my absence was the problem that needed solving, not the reason I'd had to leave in the first place. I kept walking. By 9:30 p.m., my hands were numb, and I was starting to think that maybe this had been a stupid impulse. Emma's apartment was on the north side of town, about 3 miles from where I was standing, and I'd turned off my phone because I couldn't handle the notifications anymore. I should have gone to Emma's immediately. I should have explained the situation and trusted her mother to help. That's what normal people do in crisis situations. But I was 18 and hurt and convinced that if I just kept walking, I'd somehow solve the problem by getting far enough away from it. The streets started getting emptier around 10 p.m. Most people had the good sense to be home. The snow was so heavy now that it had turned the world into something monochromatic and muffled. A car passed me going slowly, probably someone trying to get home safely. I didn't think to flag it down. I don't have a clear memory of the next hour, not because it was traumatic in the way that creates amnesia, but because cold and exhaustion and emotional overload create a kind of fog. I walked. I got colder. My breathing became harder. At some point, I realized I was making a sound like crying, but I wasn't crying. My body was just shutting down, piece by piece. A truck pulled over beside me at 11:15 p.m. The window rolled down, and a woman's voice called out to me. "Honey, are you lost?" She was maybe in her 50s, and she had the look of someone who'd spent enough time in a rural area to know that 18-year-old girls in fall jackets don't just walk around in snowstorms for fun. "I'm fine," I said, but my teeth were chattering hard enough that I could barely get the words out. "Get in the truck," she said. Under normal circumstances, I would never get into a stranger's truck. Every safety lesson I'd ever been taught would have kicked in. But at that point, My core temperature had dropped enough that my brain wasn't functioning normally, and I was shaking hard enough that I couldn't physically fight her if she'd tried to hurt me. I got in the truck. She adjusted the heat and handed me a blanket from the back seat. "Where are you trying to go?" she asked. I gave her Emma's address. She nodded like it made sense, pulled back onto the road carefully, and didn't ask me any other questions. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. She had the radio on quietly, some classical music station. The heat from the vents thawed my hands enough that they started hurting, a sharp, stinging sensation as the blood returned to the extremities. When we got to Emma's building, the woman told me to take the blanket. I tried to refuse, but she was insistent in that particular way older women are that makes it clear they will not be argued with. "You should tell your parents you're safe," she said. I nodded like I was going to do that. I didn't tell her that my parents were the reason I was walking through a snowstorm in December. Emma's apartment was on the 3rd floor. The hallway had that particular smell of old buildings, cooking and carpet, and the accumulated lives of hundreds of people. I knocked on her door at 11:47 p.m. She opened it in pajamas, face breaking into confusion, and then immediate alarm when she saw me. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you?" she said. I was shaking too hard to explain clearly. She pulled me inside and started removing my wet clothes with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone with medical training in her family. Her mother appeared in a robe, took one look at me, and moved into action mode without asking questions. They got me into a hot shower, got me warm clothes, got me into Emma's bed with hot water bottles. Mrs. Chen made tea with honey and ginger. It wasn't until I was warm again and mostly thawed that I started telling them what had happened. Emma's face went darker with each sentence. "That's insane," she said. "That's actually insane. You didn't take any money." "I know," I said. "Did you tell your dad that you didn't?" Emma's mother asked. I told him. He didn't believe me. "Then he doesn't know you very well," Mrs. Chen said, which was probably the kindest thing anyone could have said in that moment. I slept that night on Emma's couch, wrapped in about 4 blankets, my muscles sore from shivering, my mind finally quiet because I was too tired to think anymore. In the morning, Mrs. Chen made me get on the phone with my father. This was non-negotiable. She was a lawyer, and she understood that running away was going to create more problems than it solved. My father answered on the 2nd ring. "Where the hell are you?" he said. His voice was shaking with anger. I could hear Margaret in the background, her voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. "I'm safe," I said. "That is not the point. The point is you left this house without permission, without telling anyone where you were going in a snowstorm. What were you thinking?" What was I thinking? I was thinking that the person I called father had decided I was a liar and a thief, that the person my father had married was systematically dismantling my credibility in his eyes, that staying in that house meant accepting a version of myself that wasn't true. But I couldn't say any of that, not over the phone, not with my voice still shaky from cold and shock. "I can't come home," I said. "We'll discuss this when you get here. You have 1 hour. Mrs. Chen took the phone from me. "Mr. Harrison, this is Jennifer Chen. I'm a lawyer, and I want you to know that your daughter is safe and will be returned to your custody. However, she has expressed feeling unsafe in your home environment, and I think we need to discuss what's happened before she comes back." I couldn't hear what he said, but I could see Mrs. Chen's expression harden. "That may be," she said. "But your daughter walked 3 miles in a blizzard last night. She didn't wake up in a snowdrift because she was feeling adventurous. Something caused that, and I think it's important that you understand the severity of your daughter's emotional state before you address this as a discipline issue." There was a pause, then Mrs. Chen hung up. "Get dressed," she said to me. "We're going to talk to him in person, and we're going to make sure he understands that this is not about teenage rebellion. This is about something more serious." The drive back to my house took 15 minutes. Emma came with us, sitting in the back seat, occasionally putting her hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Chen drove with the intensity of someone who was already formulating legal arguments in her head. When we got to my house, my father was standing in the driveway. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept, like the last 12 hours had aged him by a year. He opened the car door before it had fully stopped, and for a second, I thought he was going to pull me into an embrace. Instead, he just looked at me, and his expression was so complicated that I couldn't read it. "Come inside," he said. Margaret was in the living room. She stood when we entered, and her face arranged itself into an expression of concerned worry that was so perfectly performed it might have been a master class in manipulation. "I'm so glad you're safe," she said to me. "We were all so frightened." Mrs. Chen cut directly to the chase. "I understand there's been an allegation of theft," she said, "and that these allegations have been presented as fact, without evidence, without allowing your daughter to defend herself. Is that accurate?" "It's a family matter," my father said. "It's a matter of a child leaving her home in a blizzard because she felt unsafe," Mrs. Chen said. "That's not just a family matter, that's a crisis. And I think you need to understand the role that accusations and gaslighting play in creating that crisis." The word, gaslighting, hung in the air like someone had introduced a language my father didn't speak. "I haven't lied to anyone," Margaret said quietly. "I've simply observed things." "You observed that money was missing and immediately concluded that my client's daughter was the responsible party," Mrs. Chen said. "Without evidence, without investigation, without considering any other possibilities." "I was trying to help," Margaret said, her voice taking on that wounded quality that makes it sound like she was the victim. "Do you have proof?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Do you have video footage of her taking the money? Do you have any evidence beyond your own assertions?" "I don't need evidence to notice." "Yes, you do," Mrs. Chen said flatly. "If you're going to accuse someone of a crime, you need evidence. Otherwise, what you're doing is lying." My father had gone very still. I could see him working through something, his lawyer brain kicking in even as his emotional brain was resisting. "Are you suggesting that Margaret deliberately lied about this?" he asked. "I'm suggesting that your daughter is safe, she's reliable, and she has no history of stealing," Mrs. Chen said. "And I'm suggesting that you have someone in your home who has systematically undermined her credibility over a period of months, who has now made a serious criminal accusation against her without evidence, and who is gaslighting you about whether she's actually lying. I'm suggesting that you need to ask yourself why." The room went very quiet. My father turned to Margaret. "Did you take the money?" he asked. "Of course not," she said. "Why would I?" "Did you take the money and blame her?" he asked. "No," Margaret said, but something in her face shifted. Not enough for my father to catch it, not enough to be definitive, but enough for me to see that the truth was more complicated than simple yes or no. Mrs. Chen saw it too. "I'm recommending that your daughter stay with us for the time being," she said to my father. "And I'm recommending that you have a serious conversation about what's been happening in your marriage. Separately, I think you should contact your bank and check your recent transactions. See if there are any unusual withdrawals that you can't account for." "Are you accusing my wife of theft?" my father asked, and there was something almost desperate in his voice, like the ground was shifting beneath him and he couldn't find solid footing. "I'm recommending that you investigate before you accept anyone's version of events at face value," Mrs. Chen said, "including your wife's." She left me with him for 30 minutes while she and Emma waited in the car. I went up to my room and packed a larger bag, clothes, books, my laptop, anything I thought I might need for an extended stay. My father didn't try to stop me, didn't say anything at all. He just sat on his bed and stared at nothing while I moved through the room. As I was leaving, he spoke. "I believe you," he said, "about not taking the money." I stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "Okay," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Sorry doesn't undo the night I walked through a snowstorm because the only person I should have been able to trust decided I was a liar instead. "Where will you go?" he asked. "The Chens will let me stay," I said. "I'll figure out the rest." I left that house on December 16th at 1:47 p.m. I was wearing a borrowed winter coat because my fall jacket was destroyed, damp and torn. I didn't come back for almost 10 years. What happened next was the part that people don't talk about when they talk about betrayal. It's not the dramatic moment of discovery. It's the aftermath. It's learning to function as a person who has been fundamentally betrayed by someone they loved. I ended up going to college 2 states away, UC Davis, studying criminal law with a minor in forensic psychology. The choice was not accidental. I spent 4 years learning how people lie, how they manipulate, how they construct narratives that serve their interests. I became very good at seeing lies. Emma's mother helped me get financial aid. My father sent money for tuition, and he never asked for me to come home, which I appreciated because I didn't have to turn him down. We texted occasionally, holiday updates, birthdays, the kind of polite communication that says, "I love you, but I'm not ready to forgive you yet." Margaret left my father in 2011. The details are vague because I didn't ask for them, and my father didn't offer them, but I suspect Mrs. Chen had been right. I suspect there were transactions that didn't add up, money that went somewhere it shouldn't have gone. I suspect my father eventually realized that the woman he'd married had been methodically stealing from him while simultaneously framing his teenage daughter for the crime. But by then, the damage had been done. I had spent 3 years thinking I was a bad person. 3 years of wondering if my father was right, if there was something inherently wrong with me that made people want to lie about me. 3 years of anxiety that came with being accused of something I didn't do. It took me until I was 21 to understand that what had happened wasn't my fault. And it took me until I was 25 to understand that the real crime wasn't the stolen money. The real crime was the lie. The real crime was that someone had deliberately damaged my relationship with my father, and my father had let himself be a tool in that damage. After graduation, I moved back to my home state. Not back to my father's house, I wasn't ready for that yet, but to the same city. I rented a small apartment downtown and started working as a paralegal for a family law firm, specializing in custody disputes and domestic manipulation cases. It was during my 2nd year at the firm that I did something that, in retrospect, should have been my first warning sign about who I was becoming. I tracked down Margaret. Not stalked, exactly. I used databases that I had legal access to through my job, and I found her easily. She was living in California, remarried, living a comfortable life in a suburb 40 minutes outside of San Jose. Her new husband was a venture capitalist. She had a house with a pool and a gate. For 6 months, I did nothing but gather information. I created files. I documented her movements, her financial transactions, her social media presence. I told myself I was just curious, just understanding the architecture of her life in the way a criminal might understand a mark. But it wasn't curiosity, it was hunger. In the spring of 2014, I did something I shouldn't have done. I called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear her confusion when she didn't recognize the number. "Hello," she said. "Hi, Margaret," I said. "It's Sarah. Sarah Harrison. I'm just checking in to see how you're doing." There was a pause, long enough that I knew she was processing who I was, what my name meant. "Sarah," she said, "I'm surprised to hear from you." "Yeah, well," I said, "it's been a long time." "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways," I said, which was a stupid thing to say, but I was running on adrenaline and anger that had been building for 6 years. "Is your father all right?" she asked, and the fact that she immediately thought something was wrong with him told me that somewhere in her conscience, she knew she'd caused him damage. "He's fine," I said. "I just wanted to tell you that I know what you did." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had gone very small. "You took the money," I said. "You blamed me for it. You manipulated my father into thinking I was a liar and a thief, and then you left him because you were afraid he was starting to figure it out." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Those are serious accusations," she said finally. "They're facts," I said. "You destroyed my relationship with my father, and you got away with it because everyone was too willing to believe the worst version of me." "If you're calling to threaten me," she started. I'm not threatening you, I said. I'm just telling you that I know, and I'm going to spend as much time as I need proving it. I hung up. That phone call was the moment I became someone different. Not the victim anymore, not the person who was wronged. Something colder, something with a plan. It took me 3 years to build a case. Part of the challenge was that I couldn't use anything I'd learned through my work at the law firm. I couldn't access any databases that weren't available to the public. I had to be careful, legally careful, in a way that meant my evidence had to be built brick by brick, in real time, with my own resources. But I had something better than access to databases. I had time, and I had clarity about what I was looking for. I hired a private investigator in California, a woman named Donna Reeves who had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. I told her exactly what I wanted. Margaret's financial records for 2008-2011, bank statements, credit card transactions, anything that might show irregular withdrawals or transfers. That's going to be expensive, Donna told me on our first call. And it's going to require Margaret to have a reason for those records to exist in discoverable form. What if she's suing someone? I said. What if she's involved in a lawsuit? Donna was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to find someone to sue her, she said. I'm asking you to find the truth, I said. And if the truth happens to make a lawsuit possible, that's just good fortune. It turns out that suing someone is not actually that difficult if you have a plausible reason and you're willing to lie about it. I didn't personally file the lawsuit. I contacted her new husband's business partner, a man named James Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, just a convenient coincidence, who had been involved in a minor contract dispute with a property development company that Margaret had invested in. The dispute had been settled, but I contacted him anyway and offered to help him reopen the case if he was interested in pursuing it further. The investment vehicle had some irregularities that suggested Margaret might have misrepresented the financial status of the company. James was initially skeptical, but after I explained what I was looking for and why, he agreed to pursue it. We filed a motion for discovery that gave us legal access to Margaret's financial records. What we found was beautiful, in a cold sort of way. Margaret hadn't been stealing random amounts. She'd been systematically transferring money from joint accounts that she and my father maintained into an investment account that had been set up in her sole name. Over the course of 3 years, she transferred approximately $87,000. The money that went missing from the household envelope, the $40 and the $80 that had destroyed my relationship with my father, those were intentional. Those were bait. She needed an explanation for where some of the money was going. She needed a story. She couldn't say she was taking it, so she blamed me. She blamed a teenager who lived in her house, who had never given her any reason to distrust her because I was convenient, because I was young, because my father would believe her over me. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank records, account transfers, a clear pattern of deception that went back years before she'd even married my father. I gave all of it to my father on a Tuesday evening in March. I came to his new house, in a neighborhood 2 towns over, with a folder full of documents. He didn't look at them at first. He just looked at me, standing in his living room like a stranger. I can explain how I found all this, I said. None of it was illegal, and all of it is admissible. He opened the folder slowly. It took him about 30 minutes to get through everything. I could see the moment when the weight of what he was reading fully landed, the moment when he understood that he had defended the woman who had betrayed both of us, that he had blamed his daughter for crimes his wife committed, that he'd had to spend years rebuilding a relationship that should never have been broken in the first place. When he finished, he set the folder down on the coffee table and he cried. Not the kind of crying that people do for sympathy, the kind of crying that comes from genuine, bone-deep grief. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. I should have believed you, he said. Yes, I said, you should have. We didn't hug. We didn't rebuild our relationship right then. But we started the process of accountability, which is not the same as forgiveness, but is at least the beginning of honesty. The lawsuit against Margaret took 18 months to reach trial. Her lawyers tried every tactic available. They disputed the validity of the documents, claimed the discovery process had been improper, argued that even if the money transfers had happened, they didn't constitute fraud because the money had technically still been part of the family assets. But they were fighting a losing battle, and they knew it. A jury would see exactly what I saw: a woman who had systematically stolen from her husband and blamed a teenager for the crime. Margaret tried to settle. Her lawyers reached out to mine with an offer. We could resolve this quietly, a cash settlement that would be kept confidential, no admission of wrongdoing. I told my lawyer to refuse. The trial started on September 3rd, 2017. I was 27 years old, and I sat in that same courthouse gallery where I'm sitting now, 9 years later, watching my father rebuild himself from the testimony that proved what he should have believed all along. Margaret took the stand in her own defense, which was a decision her lawyers probably advised against. She was composed, articulate, sympathetic. She talked about her difficult upbringing. She talked about the financial stress she'd felt. She talked about how sometimes people make mistakes, and how she hoped everyone could find it in their hearts to forgive her. The jury did not forgive her. The verdict came back on September 14th. Margaret was found liable for fraud, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty. She was ordered to repay my father $87,000 plus damages and court costs, totaling $147,000. More importantly, the verdict was public record. The details of how she'd manipulated my father, how she'd blamed me, how she'd systematically deceived both of us, those details were now part of a legal record that anyone could read. After the verdict was announced, Margaret left the courthouse with her lawyer, and she didn't look back. Her new marriage ended 6 months later, which I only know about because it was mentioned in a brief Google search. I've never followed up on what happened to her after that. I've never felt the need. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about getting justice. It doesn't feel the way you think it's going to feel. I won, my father won. Margaret lost. The evidence was irrefutable, and the verdict was decisive. By every measure of success, I had accomplished exactly what I set out to do. And it was hollow. The night of the verdict, I went home to my apartment, and I sat on my couch in the dark, and I realized something that I've spent the last 9 years learning to live with. I had become exactly what Margaret was. Not a liar, not a thief, but someone who was willing to manipulate the system, to use her as a pawn, to orchestrate her downfall with the same calculated precision that she'd used to orchestrate mine. I had spent 6 years building a case against her, not because I needed to. My father had believed me. My relationship with him was healing. I had everything I actually needed. I had done it because I was hungry for justice in a way that wasn't about justice anymore. It was about revenge. It was about making her suffer the way I'd suffered. It was about proving that I was smarter than her, that I could outmaneuver her, that I could take her down. And in pursuit of that, I had become someone I didn't particularly like. This is where the story gets quiet. This is the part that doesn't make it into the revenge narrative, because revenge narratives are supposed to end with vindication and triumph, and the knowledge that you were right all along. But after the trial, after Margaret was publicly humiliated, after my father and I had rebuilt something that approximated a father-daughter relationship, I had to sit with the fact that I'd spent 6 years of my life obsessing over someone who'd hurt me when I was 18. 6 years. Margaret had moved on within months. She'd gotten married again, started a business, built a life that didn't involve me at all. I was the one still thinking about her, still planning revenge, still using her as a blueprint for who I never wanted to be. And even worse, in my obsession with destroying her, I'd almost become her. I'd used manipulation. I'd used the legal system as a weapon. I'd orchestrated her downfall with the same calculated precision that she'd used to orchestrate mine. The only difference was that I was right, and she was wrong. The only difference was that justice was on my side. And I'm not sure that's actually a difference at all. My father and I have dinner together now, every other Sunday. We've never talked directly about what happened. We've never revisited the trial or the evidence or the ways we both failed each other in December 2008. But we've learned to exist together in a way that acknowledges the past without being consumed by it. Last Sunday, he asked me if I was happy. I said yes, which is technically true. I'm happy the way that people are happy when they've learned to live with their own capacity for darkness. I'm happy because I've made peace with the fact that I was willing to destroy someone else in order to prove a point. I'm happy because I've learned that justice and revenge are not the same thing, and pursuing one doesn't make you noble just because it overlaps with the other. I still think about Margaret sometimes. I saw her once about 5 years after the trial at a grocery store in the next town over. She was buying vegetables, living her life, probably not thinking about me at all. I didn't approach her. I didn't say anything. I just watched her, and I tried to feel something, rage or vindication or satisfaction. But all I felt was tired. The real thing that I wish someone had told me when I was 18 and hurt, and convinced that destroying the person who hurt me would make things better is this. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about climbing off the hook you've been dangling from while you wait for them to suffer. Forgiveness isn't about them at all. It's about you. It's about deciding that you're not going to spend the rest of your life building a case against someone, because the person you're really testifying against is yourself. I'm sitting in the courthouse gallery now, 10 years after the trial. My father is about to walk through those doors for a completely unrelated matter. He's testifying in a business dispute, something to do with contract law. He has no idea I'm here. I came to surprise him, to take him to lunch after his testimony. The clock reads 9:47 a.m. I think about that 18-year-old girl who walked into a snowstorm because she couldn't bear the weight of being misunderstood by the person she loved. I think about the 27-year-old woman who orchestrated someone else's downfall because she couldn't bear the weight of a life that didn't include revenge. And I think about the woman I am now, the one who came to this courthouse not to watch justice happen, but simply to be present for her father. The doors open, and he walks through. He sees me, and his face changes. Surprise, pleasure, that particular kind of happiness that comes from unexpected grace. He walks over and he hugs me, and I let myself be held. "What are you doing here?" he asks. "Thought I'd surprise you," I say. "Mission accomplished," he says. We walk out of the courthouse together into a bright March morning, the kind of day that comes after winter has finally admitted defeat. The snow is long gone. The roads are clear. Sometimes that's all the revenge we need, the knowledge that we survived it, that we're still here, and that the people who hurt us don't get to define who we become. Sometimes that's enough.